In an academic culture that is ideologically progressive, the humanities are increasingly skewed. In a broader culture that are ideologically and technologically progressive, the humanities are increasingly ignored. This is a problem. We need the humanities. In recent videos, I've been talking about the problems of ideological polarization and lowered academic standards in the humanities using University of California, Riverside English professor Jalandra Davis as a demonstrative case study. Thus far, I've been almost entirely critical of the professor and have argued that the things that I've criticized in her reflect larger systemic problems within some corners of academia. In this and in the next video, I'm striving to validate as much as I can in the paper of Davis that I've been reviewing and using this paper as a springboard to talk about the critical role that humanities scholars could be playing in dealing with the most pressing and enduring problems facing humanity. I will discuss the single biggest event in human history, an event that has received criminally little attention. I will also discuss critically important events and institutions such as colonialism, slavery, and capitalism, as well as the question that is at the very foundation of both academia and democracy. What constitutes a valid idea? Miss Davis refers to the centerpiece of her academic work as the crossing merfolk narrative. This is the mythological notion that black slaves thrown off of slave ships during the slave trade became mermaids. As a cultural critic, Ms. Davis is interested in studying narratives like this one to make better sense of Black people's experience, history, culture, and the Western colonial world that has often not been at all kind to them. It's very easy to mock and dismiss a professor who refers to mermaid studies as her life's work, but we need look no further than Jordan Peterson to see the value that can be contained in mythology and in children's stories. The problem that I've been shining a light on is two-headed: extreme ideological polarization and low academic standards in various corners of the humanities. I believe that these problems are interlinked, as there have been plenty of demonstrations of academics within these disciplines setting a low bar for scholarly work just so long as said work bolsters leftist identity politics and postmodernism. Similar problems exist in some areas of the social sciences, and to be clear, none of this would be any better if the biases were favoring the right. If you want to hear more about my criticisms of Ms. Davis's work and how they reflect broader problems within academia, check out my video on social justice and low academic standards in the humanities, linked in the video description below. But now let's get to the part where I validate as much as I can in Davis's paper and talk about the important role for the humanities in dealing with our most pressing issues. As Jordan Peterson often says, hierarchies can and do become corrupted, and they will always leave some people behind. Next, no narrative can foreground everything that matters in every way that it matters. Next again, categorization always involves foregrounding some things while backgrounding others. With different value systems come different narratives, hierarchies, and categories. This is important, because it's very easy to not recognize as value systems the value systems that underlie our narratives, hierarchies, and categories, and that drive our thoughts and emotions and behaviors. Anthropologists have made careers out of demonstrating that culture can be invisible from the inside. The best antidote to this, of course, is exposure to other cultures and other ways of thinking, other value systems. While I complain about a lack of intellectual diversity within various fields, Ms. Davis absolutely does shine light on underrepresented perspectives from African lore. Not only does this enable us to see the world through other perspectives, it reminds us that our worldviews are just worldviews. They're not transparent and they're not comprehensive views of the world. This sort of confusion of worldview with world has been a major focus of social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. In his book, The Righteous Mind, a major theme Haidt investigates is how liberal, academic, affluent Westerners have a set of values that they, like most people, treat as being obvious and universal. But they're not. they're not obvious, and they're not universal. They're actually weird. Weird in the sense that they are shared by only a minority of the world. Given this, some social scientists refer to Western, educated, industrialized, rich democracies as being weird, and statistically speaking, the acronym fits. Among us weirdos, it would appear that people who are liberal and financially comfortable are often particularly weird. Haidt and his colleagues have found that self-identifying liberals tend to place a great deal of weight on the moral foundations of care and harm on the one hand, and fairness and equality on the other. Conservatives place significant value on these moral foundations too, though not quite as much as liberals. By contrast, conservatives also care a lot about the moral foundations of in-group loyalty, respect and authority, and purity, sanctity, things that liberals tend to put very, very little moral weight on. Haidt has found that Western conservative moral foundations are less weird than those of Western liberals. When you leave the Western world, people tend to care more about loyalty, authority, and sanctity than Westerners in general and Western liberals in particular. Wealth is also relevant here. Both within and outside of the West, more affluent people tend to care far less than less affluent people about in-group loyalty, sanctity, purity, and authority. In fact, Haidt found there to be more overlap between affluent Americans and affluent Brazilians than he found across economic classes within these two nations. As Haidt pointed out in his book, the fact that academics studying moral psychology and moral philosophy tend to be Western, liberal, and financially comfortable has created a sort of moral tunnel vision. Academics have defined morality in terms of care and harm and fairness and equality, ignoring the other moral foundations held primarily by people who are more conservative and or less affluent. In so doing, they have baked their non-universal, non-comprehensive moral values into their study of moral values and moral cognition, probably without even knowing it. And then when a conservative doesn't buy into their findings, they're liable to be demeaned as being uneducated science deniers. So Ms. Davis is absolutely correct when she alludes to our cultural tunnel vision and when she points to studying non-Western culture as a remedy. Having said that, while trying to increase ethno-cultural balance in academia, I think the professor goes too far when she argues that science and rationality should not be privileged over other ways of knowing. And that's a common expression, it's not just her term. Reason and science, when done right, deserve the loftiest of perches. Of course, for reasons both innocent and not, they are not always done right. But rather than trying to drag down these imperfectly applied processes, I advocate for pushing them closer to their ideal. And one way to do this is to foster intellectual, cultural, and ideological diversity. Reason and science tend to reflect the values and priorities of the user. People with different values can come to different conclusions while being equally reasonable and honest. If science and reason are producing skewed results, it might be because too many of the people using them have the same values. So while science and reason can absolutely be skewed and corrupted, if we downgrade them to being no better than any other way of knowing, how do we avoid the conclusion that all it takes for a belief to be just as valid as any other belief is that somebody believes it? If every belief is as valid as every other, how do we adjudicate disagreements? And if we can't defer to reason or science, what is our bulwark against might equals right? If we elevate reason and science and do a decent job of maintaining high standards in both, we can at least avoid some of these might equals right situations. But put a pin in this because I'm going to come back to this problem at the end. Now I'd like to start talking about the most important event in human history and perhaps Earth history: the advent of mass-scale agriculture. A major focus in Davis's paper is the correct observation that we tend to view humanity as being distinct from and above the world and all other forms of life. This belief, while often remaining tacit, is foundational to how we think and act in the world. An error Davis makes, however, is in crediting this humanity is special and the whole world is ours worldview to the West, white supremacy, and capitalism. While the worldview was held and enacted all but unanimously in the West, it predated the West, and Westerners make up only a minority of those who hold and enact it today and in the past. While the cause and effect relationship is ambiguous, this worldview is the intellectual underpinning of the agricultural revolutions that have taken place. The advent of mass-scale agriculture was the pivotal moment in human history and one of the pivotal moments of Earth history. Prior to agriculture, humans were no more different from the rest of the community of life than were bees or bears or any other species. Like every other species, our ancestors had their adaptations, which they used to the best of their abilities to survive and reproduce. Critically, our ancestors were comparably susceptible to the whims of nature as most other species. This was because, as author Daniel Quinn wrote, like all other species, our ancestors used to follow what Quinn referred to as the law of limited competition. Per this law, one may compete for survival and reproduction to the best of their ability, but they may not strive to exterminate their competitors, they may not destroy their competitors' food supply in order to cultivate the land for their own use, and they may not deny their competitors access to food. Here, competitors refers to non-human organisms that are getting in our way. Per Quinn, the outcome of everyone abiding by this set of laws is the preservation of biological diversity, which will in turn maximize the longevity of life as a whole, though not that of any one group or species. The reason for this is that in a world that changes, greater biological diversity means more chances that at least some organisms will be fit to survive in the changed world. When some human tribes started engaging in large-scale agriculture, they began flouting all of these rules. Large-scale agriculture did a few things. Firstly, it greatly increased the food supply, which drove tribal population explosion. It also allowed for settlement, which allowed for the accumulation of resources and the fortification of homes and communities, creating the ultimate home field advantage in cases of conflict. Because of settlement and the efficiency of farming, it allowed for specialization of labor.
What is your profession?
Now that only a minority of tribe members needed to be involved in food procurement, some could become makers of weapons and tools.
I'm a potter.
Builders of homes and territorial fortifications, and others could become professional soldiers.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Imagine what a competitive advantage such a tribe would have over the much smaller, nomadic, hunter-gatherer tribes whose most sophisticated weapons would be rocks and slightly modified sticks.
You see, old friend, I brought more soldiers than you did.
Because of the constant food surpluses, these agricultural tribes were continually growing in population, thereby creating the need for more land to live and farm upon. Colonization is born. And if a nomadic tribe had to be displaced or was simply acting unpredictably, in a time of no intertribal language, the soldiers would sometimes have to let their actions speak louder than their words. Here, we see the class of competitors expand to include other humans. When you destroy other species, you reduce biological diversity. When you destroy other tribes, you destroy a bit of biodiversity, but you destroy potentially a lot of cultural diversity. And because this was happening in pre-literate times, when a tribe was eliminated, so was its knowledge on how to live. This great forgetting, as Quinn referred to it, happened over and over again. Davis alluded to this, quoting another author who wrote, "Deep histories tumble in unruly graves that are bulldozed into gardens of progress." This is no small deal. The procedural knowledge that was being lost was the cutting edge of a process of cultural and biological accumulation and tinkering dating back to the beginning of life itself. And it was being replaced with a new invention that was still in the early stages of its beta testing. Just as harmful mutations in the biological realm greatly outnumber helpful ones, most cultural mutations are not steps forward. So when people make big, sweeping changes very quickly and then also get rid of the wisdom that was being supplanted, it's like they're walking in a dark forest without leaving a bread trail behind them. If they end up in a bad place, they will not be able to get back. That wraps up part one. In part 2, I will be exploring the birth of slavery and money, pros and cons of both capitalism and agriculture, and how a slight tweaking of the wording of Professor Davis's call for us not to prioritize rationality and science over other ways of knowing makes the statement much more defensible. As you can imagine, it's much easier and more profitable to pick an ideology and cater to it. Hence, many creators do just that. If you're tired of toxic, polarized content and want to help show that there is in fact a market for balanced and constructive analysis, one way you can do that is by liking, subscribing, and sharing. In addition to helping me out, this will show other creators that people like you exist. I'm not asking for your money, but your vote of support would be very much appreciated. I'll see you next time for part 2.